My Haunted Doll. Part 1. Whispers in the Dark. Introduction. The first time I heard the doll whisper, I thought it was the wind. It was a faint, almost delicate sound, like a breath drawn just beside my ear. I was alone in my bedroom, the windows shut tight, yet the voice murmured a name I hadn't heard in years. My name, slowly, with an eerie sweetness. Emily, you see, this wasn't just any doll. It wasn't a gift or a family heirloom. I bought it at a garage sale for $5, thinking it would make a quirky decoration for my shelf. But ever since I brought her home, things haven't been the same. Body, it started 3 days ago. I remember because it was the day I moved into my new apartment. A quaint little place on the edge of town, cheap, quiet, and just the right amount of creepy. The kind of place with vintage wallpaper curling at the corners, floorboards that creaked in protest, and a strange chill that lingered even on warm days. I unpacked in a frenzy, eager to make the space my own. That's when I found the doll. She was buried in a box of old books I'd picked up at a garage sale a week earlier. I didn't even remember buying her, but there she was, nestled between a torn copy of Wuthering Heights and a leather-bound journal that smelled like mold and smoke. The doll had porcelain skin, bright glass eyes, and a mouth painted into a permanent, uncanny smile. Her hair was curled and blonde, though some strands had turned a sickly yellow with age. She wore a blue velvet dress, complete with lace trim that had browned over the years. There was something hypnotic about her eyes, like they were just a little too real. I shrugged it off. A haunted-looking doll was exactly the kind of odd charm I liked. I named her Annalise and placed her on the top shelf in the living room, facing outward like a silent guardian. That night, I fell asleep easily, lulled by the exhaustion of moving and the faint creaks of an old building settling into darkness. The whispering began the second night. At first, it was so soft I thought I'd imagined it. A rustle, maybe the faint crackle of pipes. But then I heard it again, closer this time. A gentle voice, feminine, delicate. Emily. My eyes flew open. I was drenched in sweat, my room cloaked in shadows. The digital clock blinked 3:03 a.m. The window was shut, my bedroom door slightly ajar. I held my breath, heart pounding so loud I thought it would echo. The voice didn't come again. I convinced myself it was a dream. Stress, fatigue. Nothing more. But the next morning I noticed something odd. The doll, Annalise, wasn't on the shelf. I found her sitting upright on the coffee table, facing me. I live alone. I stood frozen, staring at her for what felt like hours. No one else had a key. No one else had been inside. I couldn't have moved her in my sleep, right? Trying to shake the unease, I put her back on the shelf. Maybe I'd moved her and forgotten. That night, I double-checked before bed. She was still on the shelf, smiling, watching. The whispering returned, louder this time. It wasn't just my name now, it was singing. A broken lullaby, half melody, half hiss. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. I sat upright in bed, trembling. The voice came from the hallway, slow, childlike. I crept to the door and peeked out. The living room was dark, only the dim glow from the streetlights casting long shadows through blinds. There on the coffee table, Annalise, sitting exactly as before, facing me. I didn't sleep again that night. The third day brought something worse. I was on the phone with my sister, trying to explain what had been happening. She laughed it off, said I was always drawn to creepy stuff, and maybe this was just my brain playing tricks. I wanted to believe her, but then I saw it. While on the call, I noticed the doll's head was turned, tilted slightly toward me. I hadn't touched her since I placed her back that morning. And then, right as I watched, her eye blinked, not a mechanical blink, a slow, deliberate one, like a living thing. I dropped the phone. My sister's voice faded into static as I backed away. I could hear her shouting my name on the floor, but I couldn't take my eyes off Annalise. She was still now, unmoving, but her smile looked wider, her glass eyes darker. I picked up the doll, walked to the kitchen, and stuffed her into a drawer. I slammed it shut and locked it with shaking hands. Then I sat down and tried to breathe, but the moment the sun set, the drawer began to rattle. Not gently. It shook violently, as though something inside was clawing, fighting to get out. I called a locksmith the next morning. I told him I needed stronger locks for the windows and front door. He looked around the place and asked if I'd noticed anything strange lately. Apparently, I wasn't the first tenant to ask. He told me the last woman who lived here had a nervous breakdown. Kept saying something in the house was watching her. She ended up abandoning the place in the middle of the night, left everything behind, including a collection of old dolls. I asked him if one of the dolls had a blue velvet dress. His face paled. He nodded slowly. Later that day, I opened the drawer. Annalise was gone, but she wasn't far. She was sitting in my bedroom, right on the pillow. This time, there was blood on her dress. Just a smear, faint but unmistakable. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to leave, but something held me back, like my legs wouldn't move the way I wanted. My head buzzed with static, and a part of me felt dizzy, like I was being lulled into sleep or something worse. That night, I tried to burn her. I took her outside to the alley, lit a match, and set her dress ablaze. For a moment, the flames roared to life. Her porcelain skin cracked, her hair curled and turned to ash. I watched the fire consume her, until all that was left were charred remains. I went back inside, shaking but relieved. Finally, it was over, or so I thought. I awoke at 3:03 a.m. The same lullaby echoed from the living room. My feet moved on their own. I opened the door, heart pounding in my throat. There she was, sitting on the shelf, unburned, smiling wider than before. Conclusion: they say evil can't be destroyed. It can only be moved, transferred, contained. But this isn't just any evil. It's patient, persistent, personal, and it has my name. Annalise wasn't found. I was chosen. And the haunting? It's only just begun. Part 2, The Dollmaker's Secret. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on my couch with every light in the apartment switched on, watching the doll like my life depended on it. She didn't move, not an inch, but I could feel it, this sickening pulse in the room, like the air around her was breathing. At 6 a.m., I finally stood and walked to her. I picked her up slowly, careful not to meet her glassy eyes. I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Etched into the bottom of her porcelain shoe was a tiny symbol, a circle intersected by jagged lines, like crude lightning bolts. Beneath it, in impossibly small script, A.M. I didn't know what it meant, but it felt important. I wrapped Annalise in an old towel and shoved her inside an empty suitcase. Then I locked it and shoved it in the hallway closet, throwing a stack of books on top for good measure. Just for a few hours, just long enough to think. I went to a nearby cafe with my laptop and started digging. The symbol turned out to be harder to trace than I'd expected. I didn't find any exact matches, but one result stood out. A user on an old occult forum had posted a drawing of something nearly identical, labeled Sigil of the Abandoned Maker. The post was over a decade old and filled with wild stories about cursed toys, haunted puppets, and a doll maker who sealed pieces of himself into his creations. That user hadn't logged in for years, but they had mentioned the name, Marnia. A quick search led me to an article from a local archive. Arlo Marnia, eccentric doll maker missing since 1974. I clicked through and my blood went cold. There was a picture of one of his dolls, nearly identical to Annalise. Same glassy eyes, same blue velvet dress. The article said he lived in a small town just 2 hours away and vanished under strange circumstances. Neighbors claimed they heard screams coming from his workshop, saw lights flickering late at night, and once caught him talking to what looked like empty shelves. After his disappearance, the house was emptied and sold off. Most of his dolls were auctioned. Some simply disappeared. One of the last lines in the article made my skin crawl. Those who purchased Marnia's dolls later reported strange disturbances, visions, and, in one case, the spontaneous combustion of an entire collection. I closed the laptop and stared blankly out the cafe window. A little girl was sitting at a table across from me, eating a muffin. She had a doll on her lap. Not Annalise, but something about the way it stared back at me made me shudder. I rushed home. When I opened the closet, the suitcase was tipped over. The lock was broken. The towel was crumpled in a heap. Annalise was gone. I found her in the bathroom, standing upright in the sink. Her dress was soaked. Her eyes were fixed directly on the mirror, but I could see her reflection. Her head was turned, looking over her shoulder at me. I screamed and slammed the door shut. I leaned against it, heart racing, trying to breathe. Then something scratched on the other side. Not like fingernails, like porcelain. I didn't go back in. Instead, I called the only person I could think of, my grandmother. She was a collector of old things, a woman who spent her life at estate sales, antique auctions, and buried in dusty books. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, but when I told her I had a doll I believed was haunted, her voice changed. "What does she look like?" she asked. I described Annalise. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then she whispered, "Oh, God, not again." My grandmother told me that years ago, long before I was born, she had come across a doll at a flea market that looked exactly the same. It had the same blue dress, same eyes, same strange aura. She said she felt drawn to it, unable to walk away without buying it. Within days, she began hearing whispers. Dreams turned to nightmares. Her dog refused to go near the room where she kept the doll. And then one morning, she woke up with deep scratches across her back, 3 long gouges, like from tiny claws. She threw the doll away, burned it even, but the next day it was back, sitting on her dresser, untouched. My grandfather was the one who finally took it far out into the woods and buried it. Not just a shallow grave, but deep, wrapped in chains, sealed in a box, covered in symbols copied from a priest's journal. And after that, the haunting stopped. Until now. "You say her name is Annalise?" my grandmother asked. I hesitated. Yeah, it just came to me. That's what I called her, too. Something about that made me want to cry. I begged her to help me. She told me to bring the doll to her. She lived 3 hours away, and I couldn't explain why. But I felt like I didn't have that long. The air in my apartment had grown thick, every shadow darker, every creak louder. I could feel Annalise's presence, even when I couldn't see her, like she was crawling beneath my skin, waiting. Still, I grabbed a duffel bag, forced myself into the bathroom, and wrapped the doll in a towel again. She didn't resist, but I noticed her head had turned toward me. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was scowling. I threw her in the bag, zipped it, and bolted. The drive to my grandmother's felt longer than it should have. My phone glitched the whole way. The radio fizzle was static, no matter which station I turned to. At one point, I swear I heard the same lullaby playing in reverse. Halfway there, the bag began to move. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other gripping the bag, pressing it down. The movement stopped for a moment, then the zipper slid halfway open on its own. I screamed and swerved onto the shoulder. Cars honked as I threw the bag out of the car and stepped on the brake. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my skull. Then I heard it, faint but unmistakable. Emily, I couldn't leave her there. As much as I wanted to, something told me it would only make things worse. So I got out, shoved the bag back into the trunk, locked it, and drove the rest of the way in silence. When I arrived at my grandmother's house, she was already waiting outside, holding a box covered in carvings. "Protective runes," she said. "Salt, sage, and iron nails." She didn't hesitate. We placed the doll inside the box, locked it, and carried it to the basement. She had a space down there, a circle painted on the floor, surrounded by candles and something that looked like dried herbs. The air grew cold as we descended. We placed the box in the center and lit the candles. My grandmother began to chant, something in a language I didn't understand. As she spoke, the box began to shake violently. A muffled sound came from inside, not a voice, a scream. The lights flickered, and then everything went still, dead silence. We waited. After what felt like hours, my grandmother stood and wiped sweat from her forehead. "She's sealed for now," she whispered. I didn't sleep that night, but for the first time in days, I didn't hear my name. The next morning, I helped her bury the box deep in the woods, just like my grandfather had done. Chains, salt, symbols, everything. When it was done, we stood over the grave in silence. I thought it was over. I thought I'd finally escaped. But 2 nights later, when I returned home, there was a package waiting for me. No return address. Inside, wrapped in lace and velvet, was a single porcelain arm, and tucked beside it, a note. You can't bury what remembers you. Part 3. The arm in the box. I didn't bring the porcelain arm inside. I stood at my doorstep, the package cradled in my shaking hands, the note burning into my brain. You can't bury what remembers you. The handwriting was spidery, erratic, as if written in a fit of rage or ecstasy. The paper smelled faintly of old perfume and earth, like something dug up, not mailed. I walked it straight to the dumpster behind my building, chucked it in, and walked away without looking back. But all night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, not from the shadows, from inside me, like something was curling beneath my ribs, biding its time. In the morning, I went outside and checked the dumpster again, against every instinct. It was empty. The trash hadn't been collected yet. I asked the maintenance guy if he cleaned it out. He said no, hadn't been touched. I stood there, heart thudding, the stench of sour garbage rising around me, and understood something I didn't want to say aloud. She knew I tried to erase her, and she was reforming, piece by piece. That night, I dreamed the woods where we'd buried the box. But in the dream, there was no dirt, just endless dolls, stacked like corpses, eyes wide open, limbs missing. I was walking between them, barefoot, and every step echoed like a heartbeat. In the center of the field was Annalise, sitting in her blue velvet dress. Her porcelain arm was reattached. She turned to me and smiled, soft, sweet, and full of rot. I woke up screaming, and sitting at the foot of my bed was something wrapped in velvet. I didn't move for a full minute. Eventually, I forced myself to reach out and pull the cloth away. Inside, resting delicately on the bedsheet, was her other arm, this one perfectly intact, down to the faint blush of pink on the fingertips. There was no note this time. No need. She was telling me exactly what was happening. The next morning, I packed a bag and drove back to my grandmother's. But when I arrived, the front door was wide open. There was no sign of forced entry. No broken glass. No chaos. Just silence. I called her name. Nothing. I searched the house, calling louder and louder, my panic rising with each unanswered breath. When I reached the basement, I hesitated at the top of the stairs. A single candle flickered in the darkness below. The circle on the floor was smudged, as if someone had wiped part of it away. The protective carvings were cracked. The box was gone. But something else had been left in its place. A photograph, black and white, faded. It showed a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, holding a doll that looked exactly like Annalise. Standing beside her was a man with sunken eyes and long fingers resting on the girl's shoulder. Scribbled across the back of the photo were the words, "It always starts with a name." I found my grandmother upstairs, sitting silently in her rocking chair, eyes wide and unblinking. She was alive, but barely. When I touched her shoulder, she flinched like she'd been electrocuted. She said, "Your name," she whispered. "What?" She said your name in my dreams, over and over, like a song. I wanted to believe this was all psychological, a shared delusion. But how could it be? Not with things appearing, disappearing, breaking the laws of logic and physics. My grandmother had no reason to play into this, no motivation to pretend. She handed me a thin notebook. "This belonged to your grandfather," she said. "He kept notes after we buried her the first time." I opened it. The first page had a sketch of the sigil I'd found under Annalise's shoe. Beneath it, his words were scribbled in red ink. "She is not a doll. She is a memory that refuses to fade." Each page after that detailed methods of containment, stories from other victims, and odd patterns, the way she always reappeared near bodies of water, how her reformation followed lunar cycles, and most importantly, how saying her name too many times seemed to strengthen her. I had said her name so many times. One page caught my attention more than the rest. "To sever the bond, you must return her to where she was made. Only the maker's tools can unmake her. I didn't know where Arlo Marnia's workshop had been, but the article I'd found mentioned the town of Merrick Hollow. I checked the address listed. Still standing. According to maps, the house was 3 hours away. I left before sunset. The drive was eerily smooth, as if the universe was holding its breath. No static on the radio this time. Just soft music. A lullaby I hadn't heard before, but that felt familiar. When I pulled up to the old house, I was shocked it was still standing. The windows were boarded. The paint was peeling in long strips, exposing gray wood underneath. Ivy crawled over the brick like veins. The air smelled like dust and mold and something sour underneath. I pushed the front door open. It groaned like it hadn't been moved in decades. The house was silent, but not empty. I could feel her. The living room was full of dolls. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all perched on dusty shelves, tables, even the floor. Most were broken, arms missing, faces cracked. Some had been stitched back together with thread, so dark it looked like veins. And in the center of the room, on a child-sized chair, the torso, her dress was torn but unmistakable. Blue velvet, frayed at the edges. Her body was propped upright, arms missing, but she was waiting. I didn't approach. Instead, I walked deeper into the house, past the shattered mirror in the hallway, into the room that must have once been Arlo Marnia's workshop. It was filled with tools, books, old sketches of dolls in strange poses. One drawing in particular caught my eye. It showed a human heart inside a porcelain chest. Beneath it, she needs more than clay and glass. She needs memory. She needs fear. I rifled through the drawers until I found what looked like a set of specialized carving tools, wrapped in black cloth and sealed with wax. I took them and walked back into the living room. The torso was gone. All the dolls had turned their heads to face me. My breath caught in my throat. Then I heard the soft thud of something hitting the floor upstairs. I followed the sound, heart hammering in my ears, and climbed the staircase. At the top was a narrow hallway with doors on either side. The second door on the left was open. Inside, lying neatly on the floor, was the doll's head. Her eyes fluttered open as I entered, and she smiled, the same way she had in the dream. The door slammed shut behind me. I turned to open it, but it was locked tight. The room grew darker, the air thicker. Shadows moved along the walls like they were alive. Then I heard it, footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, too heavy for such a small body. I turned around. Standing in the corner of the room was a figure, tall, skeletal, wearing a cracked porcelain mask. It looked human, but the way it moved was not. Its joints clicked like gears grinding against bone. In its hand, it held the rest of Annalise, and it was assembling her. One arm, then the other, the torso, the head, piece by piece, clicking into place. When she was whole again, the figure stepped back and vanished into the wall like smoke. Annalise blinked once. Then she turned her head toward me and whispered something I'll never forget. "Now it's your turn." The door behind me swung open on its own, and all down the hallway, the dolls had begun to move. Part 4, the mirror room. I ran. I didn't care where the road led, only that it took me away from that house, away from Annalise, away from the feeling that something ancient and cruel had just chosen me. The night outside was ink black, the trees skeletal under the moonlight. Every shadow twitched. Every turn of the car's tires echoed louder than the last. But I couldn't outpace the cold crawling through my veins. When I finally made it back to my apartment, it was nearly 3 a.m. The lights flickered as I walked in, and I half expected to find another package waiting. But there was nothing but the silence that pressed in too tightly. I left the lights on in every room and sat on the couch with my grandfather's journal open in my lap. I tried to read, but the words shifted on the page. I blinked again and again, trying to focus. My heart was pounding. My skin tingled like it wasn't my own. That's when I saw it. In the mirror across from me, the old standing mirror that came with the apartment, I wasn't alone. My reflection was impossibly holding something in its hand. A doll, and not just any doll. Annalise. But in my actual hands, nothing. I stood slowly, legs trembling, and approached the mirror. My reflection smiled. I didn't. It lifted the doll and began to pull a thread from its chest, a red, glistening string, like wet sinew. My reflection leaned in close, mouth moving. I couldn't hear it, but I could read the lips. "You're unraveling." The mirror shattered. I screamed and staggered backward as shards rained down like silver rain. Blood beaded on my arms, but I barely noticed. The doll was gone. The reflection gone. The silence had changed. It was heavier, like someone else was breathing in the room with me. I couldn't sleep. I spent the rest of the night reading every page of my grandfather's journal. I searched for clues, for guidance, for anything, and I found something. A map, crude, hand-drawn, but familiar enough. It showed the house in Merrick Hollow, the woods behind it, and a trail leading to a location labeled the Mirror Room. My grandfather had circled it in red and scrawled a warning. She reflects what you fear and then becomes it. I had no doubt now. Annalise was not just a cursed object. She was something else, a vessel for trauma, for fear, for old magic that bled into the fabric of reality. The mirror wasn't just showing twisted images. It was letting her through. I had to go back. I had to find the Mirror Room. Maybe, just maybe, it held a way to end this. The next morning, I packed a small bag, brought salt, iron nails, old protections I'd read about, and the carving tools from Arlo Marnia's workshop. I wore a pendant of iron I found in my grandfather's box. I didn't know if it worked, but it made me feel less alone. The woods behind the Marnia house were thicker than I remembered. The trees pressed in, gnarled and whispering in the wind. The further I went, the less I could hear birdsong. Or anything. Just my breathing. Eventually, I reached a small clearing. The ground was soft with moss, and in the center stood a structure, barely a hut. It was gray with age, the door hanging crookedly from rusted hinges. Above the door, scrawled in soot or blood, were the words, "The room remembers." Inside, mirrors. Every wall, floor to ceiling, was covered in old, warped glass. Some were cracked, others fogged over. But each one showed something different, some impossible. One showed me as a child, crying in my old room. Another showed my grandmother, younger, holding the doll with a look of sheer horror on her face. One showed Arlo Marnia, carving a heart into the chest of a porcelain figure. And in the center of the room was a pedestal. On it rested a hand mirror, ornate, gilded in silver and crusted with age. The glass shimmered faintly, as if something pulsed just beneath its surface. I stepped forward, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. As I touched the mirror, air shifted. Every reflection in the room turned toward me at once. Hundreds of versions of myself, blinking in unison. And behind each of them, her, Annalise, but different in every one. Sometimes cracked, sometimes smiling, sometimes with no face at all. Then the mirror in my hand flashed, bright white, and suddenly I was inside it. Or rather, I was no longer in a hut. I was in a corridor, endless, lined with mirrors. Each mirror showed a version of my life, a possibility. In one, I never found the doll. In another, I was younger, happier, before my mother disappeared. Some mirrors showed horrors, me being torn apart by dolls, drowned in a sea of porcelain limbs, buried in a coffin carved with her name. I ran. The corridor didn't end, but the mirrors changed. Now they all showed her. Every step I took, she got closer. In the glass, not in the corridor, but I could feel her watching, feel her pushing against the barrier between reflection and reality. And then one of the mirrors shattered. Glass sprayed into the air, floating unnaturally. She stepped out, whole, smiling, doll-like, but more. Her skin was porcelain, but her eyes were human. Too human, familiar. They were my eyes. "You see me now," she said, voice like wind through broken teeth. I backed away, but there was nowhere to run. "You carried me, remembered me. I fed on that." She stepped closer, the ground cracking under her delicate feet. "But now I need more." She raised a porcelain hand and pressed it to my chest. You. Pain lanced through my heart. I screamed. It felt like she was pulling something out, thread by thread. A red cord unraveled from my chest, glowing faintly. It wasn't just thread. It was memory. She was taking me apart. I reached into my bag blindly and grabbed the iron pendant. I pressed it against her hand. She shrieked. Her arm cracked. She stumbled back. Smoking. I didn't wait. I grabbed a hand mirror from the floor and smashed it against the ground. The moment it shattered, I was back, lying in the forest. The hut gone. The trees silent. But something had changed. I felt it. Something was still inside me, watching, waiting. The forest had gone cold. Too cold. When I turned to leave, I noticed something on my wrist. A red thread. Still unspooling. Still connected. I followed it with my eyes. It led into the shadows, into the dark, and it was tugging. Part 5, the stitching room. I followed the red thread. I didn't want to. Every fiber of my being told me to turn back, to run far from those woods and never return. But the thread tugged, pulling with a soft but insistent force. And deep down I knew, if I didn't follow it, she'd come anyway. She would drag me back, one stitch at a time. The thread wound around trees and dipped under roots. I stumbled through brambles and mud, branches snapping underfoot, until I reached a place the map never showed. A clearing that didn't feel like part of the world I knew. It was too quiet. The trees here grew close together, impossibly tall, their tops swallowed in darkness. The ground was littered with porcelain fragments, broken doll heads, tiny limbs, crushed glass eyes staring up at me. At the center of the clearing stood a house. Not the Marnia home. Not the hut. This was worse. A 2-story cottage built entirely from warped wood and bone-colored stone, its windows dark, curtains shifting though no wind blew. The front door was ajar, swinging gently, creaking a rhythm that sounded too much like breathing. The thread disappeared through the door. I followed. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew, old perfume, and something metallic, blood maybe, or rust. The walls were lined with shelves, and on every shelf, dolls. Hundreds of them, each one different, each one somehow familiar. They turned to watch me as I passed. Their glassy eyes tracked my movement. A few blinked. One even smiled, lips twitching as if struggling to remember how. The red thread wound its way up a narrow staircase. I followed it to the second floor, where the walls were softer, padded. Not like a hospital, like a coffin. The floor creaked under my feet, and with every step, the air grew colder. At the end of the hall was a door, painted a deep crimson, symbols carved into the frame. The thread passed under it. I opened it. The stitching room. That's the only name that came to mind. A small, circular chamber, lit by candles mounted to the walls in human-shaped sconces. In the center of the room was a massive doll-making table, stained with ink and blood and something that looked like tar. And sitting at the table, her, Annalise. But she was no longer just a doll. She'd grown, now human-sized, seated in an old, high-backed chair. Her porcelain skin had hairline fractures all across it, like a cracked eggshell barely holding together. Her joints were stitched with sinew and twine, and her head turned with a sickening creak as she looked at me. "You came," she said, and her voice sounded like mine. "I was hoping you would." I stood frozen. She held a needle in one hand, impossibly long and curved like a claw. In the other, the end of the red thread, still connected to my chest. "I've been sewing you into me for some time now," she said. "One thread for each nightmare, each secret, each guilt you never let go." I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. My lungs wouldn't expand. It was like the thread was pulling at them now, too. "I was born from pain," she whispered. "Your mother's, your grandmother's. Your grandfather tried to contain me, but you—" She smiled wide, a terrible cracking sound echoing from her jaw. "You remembered me." I forced out a breath. "What are you?" She stood. Her limbs creaked as she moved toward me, towering now, arms too long, shadows clinging to her like a second skin. "I'm every stitch of sorrow left unfinished," she said. "Every whisper ignored. Every child left crying with no one to hold them. I am the doll you loved and feared. I am what grows in spaces grief won't fill. She raised a needle, and now I just need one more piece. She lunged. I dodged instinctively, the needle slicing through the air inches from my face. I scrambled to the shelf behind me, knocking over rows of dolls. Some shattered, some screamed. I grabbed the first thing I could, a rusted pair of scissors. When she lunged again, I didn't hesitate. I cut the thread. She screamed, a sound so piercing. The windows cracked, the walls shuddered, and every candle blew out at once. The thread recoiled like a snake, shriveling in on itself. Her body convulsed, arms flailing, porcelain cracking, falling off in sheets. "No!" she shrieked. "You were mine." I threw the scissors at her chest. They struck with a dull thud, embedding in a hollow place where her heart would have been. She collapsed to her knees. And then she whispered, "It doesn't end." The floor beneath her opened like a mouth. She was pulled down, into darkness, into something that roared and hissed and crackled like fire and ice at once. The last thing I saw were her eyes, wide and angry, glaring up at me as the hole snapped shut. Silence. Then the sound of dolls falling from shelves, one by one. I ran. I didn't stop until I burst from the house, into the clearing, into air that felt like air again. The thread had burned away completely. The iron pendant I wore was hot against my chest, and in my hand was the needle, still warm. I dropped it and didn't look back. But even as I drove away, I saw something in the mirror, in the back seat, a doll, just sitting there, smiling. Part 6, the birthday tape. A week passed before I dared to touch anything connected to her again. I'd thrown the needle into the deepest part of the lake behind the old Marnia house and burned every remaining doll I could find in the attic. The red thread was gone, the whispers had faded, and for the first time in months, I thought I might finally be free, until the VHS tape showed up on my doorstep. It was wrapped in crinkled pink tissue paper. No note, no return address, just a name scrawled across the tape in a childish scrawl. "Happy birthday, Annalise." I didn't remember ordering it. I didn't remember ever having a VCR. But when I opened the box, there it was, a small, portable tape player. Clean, untouched, like it had never been used, yet looked decades old. I told myself not to watch it. I watched it anyway. The tape crackled with static before the image settled into a grainy home video. The setting, a living room in the 90s. Beige carpet, floral couch, a birthday banner sagging above the fireplace. Children gathered around the table. A cake with 6 candles. A little girl at the center. She had porcelain skin, jet black hair and curled ringlets, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Say cheese, Annalise." A voice cooed from behind the camera. The girl tilted her head slightly and waved at the lens. Her hand moved too slow. Her arm bent at an unnatural angle. But everyone around her acted like it was normal, like she wasn't made of ceramic. The tape glitched. The picture jumped. Now they were singing "Happy Birthday," off-key and slightly distorted, like it had been recorded underwater. The candles flickered. The girl stared at them. She didn't blow them out. Instead, she looked at the camera and whispered, "Make a wish." Her mouth didn't move. I paused the tape. My heart was racing. My living room felt colder now. The windows had fogged up from the inside. My breath came out in little clouds. I pressed play again. The scene had changed. The party was over. The room was empty. Streamers torn, cake smashed, one chair tipped over. And Annalise was still there, sitting perfectly still in the middle of the floor, holding something in her lap. A doll. My doll. The same cracked face. Same stitch mouth. Same button eyes. She rocked it gently, back and forth, humming the same tune I used to hum when I held her as a child. The camera zoomed in slowly, closer and closer, until her eyes filled the screen, until the static returned, and the screen went black. And then something else. A new scene, this one in my house. I saw my hallway, my stairs, my front door, shot from the inside. From the living room, I leapt up, heart hammering. The camera was showing my house in real time. The image was grainy, but unmistakable. The angle was low, like someone was watching from the floor or under the couch. I turned off the TV and yanked the plug from the wall. Silence. And then 3 knocks. At the door. I didn't answer. Another knock. This one slower. More deliberate. I crept toward the window, peeking through the curtain. No one was there, but on the doorstep. A doll. Different from Annalise. Older. Duster. She wore a tattered wedding gown. Her eyes yellowed. One hand missing. She was holding another tape. I didn't bring it inside. I didn't touch it. Instead, I took it straight to the dumpster behind the hardware store, tossed it in, and poured gasoline on top, lit a match, and walked away without looking back. That night, I didn't sleep, not because of fear, because of the sound. A low hum, coming from the living room. I found the TV on, screen black, static rolling across the bottom. The VCR was glowing. A new tape had been inserted. Play me. It read. My name was written beneath it. I pulled the tape out, slammed it into a bag, and drove 10 miles out of town. I buried it in a field and poured salt over ground. When I got home, the TV was off. Everything was still, but there she was again, Annalise, sitting at the foot of my bed, smiling. You can't bury what you invite, she whispered. I was always here. She didn't move, didn't blink, but behind her, the closet door creaked open. Inside, more dolls, dozens of them, each with a stitched number across its chest, each one turning its head in unison to look at me. And in the center, hanging by a thread from the ceiling, was a doll that looked exactly like me. Hair, clothes, face, the number stitched across its chest. 27. My age. I backed away. I gave you so many chances, Annalise said, rising to her feet. You loved me once. You held me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Now, I hold you. The closet erupted in motion. Dolls spilled out like insects, crawling across the floor, tiny arms reaching, mouths opening in soundless wails. I grabbed the iron pendant from my dresser and swung it like a weapon. They hissed, retreated, but only for a moment, because Annalise wasn't a doll anymore. She was becoming. Her limbs grew longer. Her face cracked further, revealing something black and pulsing beneath. Her hair writhed like threads being pulled by invisible hands. I stitched myself into your past, she snarled. Every birthday, every night alone, every lie you believed when they said you were just imagining things. I was there. I ran, out the door, into the street, barefoot, screaming. The neighbors never came out. Lights stayed off. Even the street lamps seemed to dim as I passed. When I looked back, the house was gone. Not empty. Gone. Just a patch of dirt where it had stood. But I knew better. It hadn't disappeared. It had been folded up, like cloth, like a dollhouse. And somewhere inside it, waiting in that stitched-up dark, she still rocked, and she still smiled. Part 7. The Seamstress of Shadows. The motel I checked into that night was the kind of place people want to disappear. Flickering neon sign. Doors that stuck when you tried to close them. A front desk clerk who didn't ask questions. That suited me just fine. I didn't tell them my real name. I didn't use my credit card. I didn't even look in the mirror when I passed one. I was too afraid of what might look back. I lay on the bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening for the sound of dolls crawling through air vents or whispering beneath the floorboards. But the night passed quietly, until 3:33 a.m., when I woke to the sound of sewing, soft, rhythmic, thread pulling through fabric. It came from the room next door. I told myself it was nothing, someone mending clothes, just coincidence. But the sound was too familiar. The same pattern I used to hear in my dreams as a child, before I ever found the doll, before I ever remembered her. Back then, I used to imagine a woman in the walls, a seamstress who stitched shadows into clothes, who sewed dreams into the lining of my blankets. I thought she was imaginary. Now I wasn't so sure. I knocked on the wall. The sewing stopped. I held my breath, and then a whisper, soft as moth wings. You left me undone. I backed away from the wall. Suddenly, the light in the room flickered. The bulb buzzed, then popped, plunging the room into darkness. In the faint light spilling from the parking lot outside, I saw it, something lying at the foot of the bed. A doll. Not Annalise. This one had a twisted wire smile, one I made a watch face, and its mouth sewn shut with human hair. A note was pinned to its chest. Every stitch a memory, every thread a sin. I threw the doll into the bathroom and locked the door. But the sewing started again inside the bathroom. I ran, didn't even take my shoes. Just grabbed my bag and bolted into the night. I drove for hours, not caring where I ended up. The farther I got from that motel, the clearer my thoughts became. For a moment, I dared to hope she couldn't follow me if I kept moving. That hope shattered the moment I stopped for gas. There, taped to the pump, was a photo of me, standing in the motel room, asleep, and in the corner behind me, the shadow of a woman sitting at a sewing table. I tore it down and ran inside the gas station. The clerk, a gaunt man in his 50s with trembling hands, looked up at me. "You're the girl with the thread," he said. I froze. "What?" "The thread. The curse one. You've been touched by the seamstress." I asked him what he meant. He hesitated, then reached beneath the counter and pulled out a worn notebook. It was filled with yellowed newspaper clippings, faded photos, and sketches of dolls with human features. He opened to a page marked with a red ribbon. The seamstress was never just a ghost. She was called into the world by grief, obsession, or a child's loneliness. Her magic is old, pre-language, pre-God. He tapped one of the drawings. It looked like Annalise. She doesn't haunt places. She haunts people. And once she stitches herself into your soul, she never leaves. I asked how to stop her. He didn't answer, just handed me a rusted needle, black with age, and said, "You can only close what's been opened, but the thread must be your own." I left the gas station with the needle and the notebook, unsure what to believe. I found an abandoned barn miles outside the city. Boarded up windows, rusted tools, dust thick enough to choke on. It felt forgotten enough that maybe, just maybe, she couldn't find me there. I studied the notebook. The old stories told of girls who stitched protective symbols into their skin with blood-soaked thread, of mirrors turned to smoke, of names sewn into the seams of reality until they unraveled. If I wanted to stop her, I'd have to finish the stitching, or undo it completely. I opened my bag and found my sewing kit. The red thread was still there. No matter how often I tried to get rid of it, it always found its way back. I threaded the needle, and I began to sew, not into cloth, into my skin, each symbol from a notebook, carefully copied onto my arm, then sewn in place. It burned like fire. My vision blurred, but I kept going. As the final stitch pierced my wrist, I felt the temperature drop. She was here. Annalise stepped out of the shadows, but she looked different now. Taller, older, like a version of myself that had never grown up. Her face was split down the middle, half doll, half human. "You can't stitch away what you invited," she said. "You were lonely." I answered. I held up my arm. The red thread burned with light. She hissed, recoiling. "You forget," I said through clenched teeth. "I made you." The barn shook. Boards groaned. The walls pulsed like lungs. All the dolls from my past, every one I'd ever owned, appeared in a circle around us. Their mouths opened. From them came a sound like 1,000 needles, sewing at once. I screamed and drove the needle straight through my own palm. The barn exploded with white light, and then silence. When I woke, I was lying in the middle of a field. No barn, no dolls, just a rusted needle clutched in my hand, and a single thread leading off into the woods. I was still stitched, still bleeding, but she was gone, for now. Part 8. The thread never breaks. I followed the red thread into the woods. It trailed across fallen leaves and broken branches, winding like a trail of blood. Each step I took made my stitched arm throb, as if the thread inside me was pulling tighter, anchoring me to something deeper than the earth, deeper than memory. The forest grew darker, even though it was barely past noon. The trees clustered close, bark peeling like dead skin. I walked in silence, but the air was thick with whispers, needle-thin voices pricking at the edges of my mind. Finish what you started. Thread me back. Make me whole. I stumbled into a clearing. At its center stood a tall, crooked tree, blackened by lightning, with a hollow split down the middle. The red thread vanished inside it. I hesitated, but my hand moved on its own, reaching out to push open the rotted bark. Inside, I found a staircase spiraling downward, carved from wood that pulsed faintly, like veins just beneath skin. I descended, step by step, into darkness. The deeper I went, the louder the sewing became. 1,000 needles dancing, fabric tearing, flesh being stitched. And then I saw it, a room lit by candlelight. Spools of thread hung from the walls like vines. Dolls lay everywhere, hundreds of them, each one twitching, whispering, weeping. At the far end sat the seamstress. Her back was turned. She worked at the table, her fingers moving too fast for the eye to follow. Thread passed through her like veins, red, black, silver. And there, beside her, sat Annalise. But now she looked empty, her button eyes cracked, her dress torn, her mouth sewn shut with barbed wire, as if the seamstress had drained her, used her. I stepped forward, the needle still in my hand. The seamstress spoke without turning. You broke the pattern. That's why you're here. What are you? I asked. I am what's left behind. When children are forgotten, when grief is ignored. I am the ache in an old toy's seams, the whisper beneath the floorboards. I raised a needle. She finally turned. Her face was a patchwork of the girl she possessed. Eyes stitched from tears, lips made from screams. And on her chest, a locket. My mother's. I froze. How did you get that? You gave it to me the day you tried to forget her. You didn't bury your grief. You sewed it into Annalise, into every stitch. She stood, towering now. You made me. The floor cracked. Dolls screamed. The air filled with threads, wrapping around my arms, legs, throat. I gasped for air, struggling as they pulled me toward her. The seamstress opened her arms. Let me finish you, she whispered. Let me sew you back into story. But as her needles descended, something inside me snapped. A memory, clearer than glass. The day I first held Annalise. Crying, alone. My mother sent still clinging to my clothes. I hadn't wanted a doll. I wanted her back. So I stitched the doll with grief, threaded with pain. I'd created a vessel for sorrow, but I could unmake it. I plunged a needle into my own stitch symbols, tearing them open. With every cut, the room trembled. Dolls burst into flames. Thread unraveled from the walls. No, the seamstress howled. You'll destroy us both. I kept cutting. The last symbol, just above my heart, glowed like fire. I drove a needle through it, screaming as pain flooded every nerve. The seamstress dissolved into red smoke. Annalise collapsed, lifeless, and I fell into darkness. When I awoke, I was lying in the field again. The crooked tree was gone. No red thread, just the wind. My skin was unmarked. No stitches, no scars, only the rusted needle beside me, half buried in dirt. I picked it up. It felt lighter, as if the weight it once carried had shifted. I walked back toward the world, unsure if the nightmare was over or just changing shape. But deep in the woods, behind me, something whispered. Stitch by stitch, you'll remember. Part 9, Stitch by Stitch. I burned the doll. I watched as the fire took her. Annalise, turning cloth to ash, buttons to melted pools of black. The flames danced with an almost human wail, like the doll itself was screaming as it died. I stood there until every last thread was gone. But I didn't feel peace. I felt wrong. The house was quiet for a few days after that. No more footsteps behind walls. No more distant lullabies or whispering in the vents. I tried to convince myself that it was over, that destroying her had ended it. But then the bruises started to appear. Not on me, on my reflection. Every time I looked in a mirror, the person staring back looked more damaged. Purple marks around the neck, stitches crawling up her arms like veins, button eyes in place of mine for just a flicker before snapping back to normal. I covered the mirrors, but I couldn't avoid them all. The TV screen, the bathroom tap, the darkened windows at night. She was always there, watching, waiting. Then came the dreams again. The field, the crooked tree, the thread. Except now, I wasn't walking through the woods. I was sewn into them. Thread bound my wrists and ankles to the ground. I could feel needles moving through my skin, threading me into the roots, the soil. I screamed, but my mouth was stitched shut. And above me, the seamstress floated like smoke, holding the burned husk of Annalise in her arms. "She's not gone," she whispered. "She's just inside you now." I woke up choking on ash. For days, I tried to ignore signs, focused on anything else. But something had changed in me. I'd see people's faces and imagine stitches across their mouths, hear laughter and mistake it for weeping. I avoided my friends, my family. I didn't want them to see what I was becoming. Or worse, was already inside me. The final straw came when I coughed up thread. Long, red strands. Knotted, pulled from my throat like a magician's trick gone wrong. That night, I drove to the edge of town, to an abandoned sewing factory I remember from childhood, a place my mother once worked, before it closed down after a fire. I had no idea why, but something pulled me there. A memory, a thread I hadn't followed yet. The building stood like a corpse. Shattered windows, a roof sagging in on itself. Rusted sewing machines sat silent like headstones. I walked through rows of them, dust rising like smoke. Then I heard it, click-clack. A single machine whirring in the back room, lit by a swinging bulb. The ancient sewing machine was moving on its own, stitching nothing. Its needle moved in sharp, angry jabs. And beside it sat something I hadn't expected. Another doll. It looked almost like Annalise, but not quite. This one was made of newspaper skin and twisted copper wire. Its eyes were made of shattered mirror shards. On its chest, a patch sewn from something I recognized immediately, a piece of my old T-shirt, the one I wore the night I first found Annalise. I backed away, but the door slammed shut behind me. The bulb flickered, and the doll stood up. Its limbs jerked like a puppet yanked by invisible strings. It tilted its head at me, then opened its mouth, and a voice came out that wasn't its own. It was mine. "I stitched myself together with grief," it said, "and left you empty." The mirror-eyed doll lunged. I fought it back, slamming it into the sewing machine, but its threads wrapped around my wrists. It tried to sew into my skin, piercing me with jagged needles from its arms. And then I saw something. Inside its chest, beneath the patch in my shirt, was a key. I tore it out and the doll screamed, unraveling in my hands. The machine exploded in sparks. The bulb shattered. I was alone, holding the key. It had a tag attached. Box 172, Mother's locker. That was when I remembered. My mom had a storage locker, one she used for old supplies after the factory shut down. I never cared to check it after she died, but now I had to. I drove in a trance, rain pouring hard against the windshield. When I arrived, the place was nearly empty, just rows and rows of metal lockers humming under flickering lights. Box 172 was at the far end. I unlocked it and pulled up the metal door. Inside were bins of thread, fabric scraps, an old iron, and a wooden box, carved with symbols I'd seen before, the same as the ones that had once been on my arm. I opened the box slowly. Inside was a photo of my mother, smiling, holding Annalise, and a journal, her journal. I flipped through it with shaking hands. She had written about me, about the grief that consumed me after she got sick, how I cried into the doll every night, how she added a binding thread to protect me, an old ritual her grandmother had taught her, something to keep sorrow from turning to madness. But something had gone wrong. The thread didn't protect me. It absorbed the grief, fed it, and when my mother died, the thread had no anchor left. So it grew, became her, the seamstress. The journal ended with a warning. If the thread is not burned with its source, it will bind again, into the heart, into the blood, stitch by stitch. I looked at my hands. Thread already curled under my fingernails. The doll may have burned, but the thread, it lived on. Part 10, Unraveled. The thread inside me pulsed like a heartbeat, sharp and relentless. I could feel it weaving beneath my skin, tightening like a noose. The key in my hand felt cold and heavy, the only chance I had to end this nightmare once and for all. I drove home through the storm, my mind racing with the journal's words. The binding thread was supposed to protect me, but it had turned into a prison. The seamstress wasn't just a ghost or a curse. She was part of me, part of my grief, sewn into my flesh and soul. Back in my room, I sat on the floor with the key and the wooden box. I needed to find the source, the thread's origin, and burn it. The journal had mentioned a ritual, something old, tied my mother's family. I pulled out the faded pages and read aloud. To break the thread, you must return to the beginning. Face the seamstress where she was born. The factory's fire was no accident. The fire burned the curse's heart, but not all the way. Find the ashes and the thread will unravel. I grabbed a flashlight and my coat and headed to the ruins of the factory. The rain had stopped, but the night was still heavy with silence. The building was a skeleton of rusted metal and broken glass. I shone my light over the rubble until I found a blackened patch on the floor, ashes cold but still pulsing with dark energy. I knelt and spread my fingers across the ashes. The thread inside me flared in pain, like it was screaming. I took the needle, my last weapon, and plunged it into the ashes. A sudden wind whipped through the ruins, carrying voices and laughter that twisted into screams. The seamstress appeared, her patchwork face angry and cracked. You cannot undo me. I am sewn into your soul. But I held firm. The needle pierced deeper into the ashes, and the thread inside me began to burn. I felt it unravel, loosening stitch by stitch, until the pain became a distant ache. The seamstress screamed as she faded into smoke. The dolls in the shadows shattered and crumbled into dust. I stood alone in the ruins, gasping. The thread was gone, but when I looked down at my hands, I saw one final stitch. Across my palm, a scar, and beneath it, a tiny knot, barely visible, a reminder that some threads never truly break. As dawn crept over the horizon, I stepped out of the factory. The weight lifted, but the memory stitched forever into my skin. The nightmare had ended, but the story, it was still being sewn. And